Welcome once again to the Inside the Box lecture series. And as a reminder, the semester is about sleeping. I met Kathy Chia at a luncheon event, I think, where she was being celebrated for becoming a new fellow of the AIA, where you get the F in front of AIA, AIA, so it's FAIA. And I remembered cornering her in the hallway because prior to that luncheon, I had been to several national events where I was a juror, and every time I went to the awards ceremony, she was there. And I thought, what is up with this and this architecture firm? I was really impressed by her work, the work of her firm, and I'll tell you a little bit about them in just a minute. So I just said that she had to come here and speak to all of you. So I'm really, really pleased. So a little bit about Kathy Chia's firm. Architect Magazine ranked Desai Chia number 19 in the nation for design excellence. Like, that's pretty hard to do. It's a great honor. Kathy is one of the founding members of Desai Chia Architecture. Since 1996, she and her partner, Arjun Desai, have established the firm's reputation for authentic design, creating inspiring and collaborative environments expressive of their use and materials. Their portfolio includes cultural, residential, and commercial projects, as well as commissions for product design and collaborations with artists. Projects are currently in development throughout the United States, Toronto, London, and Bangalore. Desai Chia's projects have been published extensively and received many accolades, including the AIA Institute Honor Award, one of the highest, AAP Small Firm of the Year Award for Multidisciplinary Architecture, numerous American Architecture Awards, the AIA Design Awards, Interior Design Best of Year Awards, the IDEA Award, and several Good Design Awards. The firm's work has been exhibited at the Center for Architecture, the Chicago Architecture Biennale, the Istanbul Biennale, the Salone del Mobile in Milan, the Herman Miller showrooms in New York and LA, and at Parsons, the New School of Design. Kathy has earned her Master's of Architecture degree from MIT and received her Bachelor of Arts degree from Amherst College. Prior to founding Desai Chia Architecture, she worked for Maya Lin, who was the commencement speaker here at SVA last year, on numerous art and architecture commissions. Chia is a registered architect in the state of New York and Connecticut. She has also been a faculty member in the architecture department at Parsons, the New School of Design, co-chair of the Van Allen Institute's Program Leadership Council, and a trustee of the United Nations International School. She is currently chair of the AIA New York Finance Committee and trustee emerita of Amherst College. We welcome her for today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. Thank you, Carol, for that generous introduction. It's really an honor to be able to speak to you today. I always enjoy having conversations with students and hearing about what you're interested in. So after this talk, I would welcome you to ask me any questions that you might have and engage in a discussion. So just to give you some background, as Carol mentioned, I went to Amherst College as an undergrad. It's a four-year liberal arts college. So I did not study architecture formally until I got to graduate school. A place like Amherst is really about a liberal arts curriculum and a way of thinking that's all about critical thinking and exploring a lot of diverse areas. So I sort of feel like my background was quite multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. I started off thinking I was going to be a math major. I then switched to become a fine arts major. And the two of those sort of blended into what became my career path as an architect. So within that education, there was always this drive to think about narrative and language, as well as fine arts and a number of other disciplines. So as I think about the topic of sleeping, there's a word that comes to mind, which I think has been one of the sort of underlying themes of projects that we do, which is ritual. So when one thinks about sleeping environments, places to sleep, how people sleep, ritual becomes an important part of, I think, the listening effort that we make with our clients. So we listen very carefully to what they do, how they think about their experiences, whether it's in a home, a work environment, a hotel. So I always find that you get little clues from clients, and then you kind of use those to drive through themes. But those themes are often based on very simple rituals in their lives. One of the inspirations that I've had since college is the world of fine arts. So I was studying history of art, but also making art. In the realm of history of art, it was everything from traditional, older areas of art from different cultures, all the way up to contemporary art. So as I think about sleeping, and as we've thought about different realms of that type of environment, this Chinese landscape painting comes to mind. The notion that this environment out here, which the painter is trying to express, is actually not necessarily a real environment. It's not necessarily a sort of realistic rendition of what that environment is. It's really more of a dreamscape. And the idea in these landscape architecture paintings, they often had a moment of architecture, the built environment, that was in contrast to the major landscape moments, but a way of thinking about what is going on in that person's mind? What are they thinking about? What is it that's making this painting talk about more than just brushstrokes on a paper, but more about a larger idea of kind of a connection to nature and a connection to something even beyond nature. So as I think about sleeping environments and places in the home or places in other environments that one might be connected to, these sorts of references back to art are big inspirations for us. Just another example of that architectural moment that then connects to another world. But within the architectural moment, you can also see how the environment in which one might contemplate, meditate, sleep has a number of things in it. So there's something that appears to be a bed, maybe a writing desk. So there are these details within the larger environment that help to shape these moments. And then as I look at contemporary art, I look at artists like Mark Rothko. So his work is incredibly immersive. When you step into or in front of a Rothko piece, you kind of get drawn into it. And it almost creates like a nighttime environment. So within the world of contemporary art, there's also a lot of inspiration that's then driven ideas in our projects. So now I'd like to take you through some of those projects and show you how they've kind of evolved, show you the ideas. But in order to show you what those projects mean in terms of the realm of sleeping, I'm actually going to take you a few steps back so you can understand the ideas of the rituals that our clients have conveyed to us and how we've tried to express them. So this is a loft in New York. It's in the old Carl Fisher building, which is in Astor Place. It's the one that used to have a giant music symbol on the side. I'm not sure if that music symbol is still there, but it's an old building that was converted to residential apartments. So our client took the raw space and we basically turned it into a home. The bedrooms are basically connected in a suite in the back of this L. There's a living room, dining room space here, kitchen and guest room, and family room space. So you come in from the front door, you walk down this hallway, and then you come into this main corner, which is where the living room kind of open family connector space is. But the connector space is really hinging the sleeping quarters with the really active kitchen zone. So as you come down the hallway, we left the raw materials of the concrete and the ceiling and the sprinkler pipes intact, and we sort of made these insertions. Now, as you start to come around the corner, you can see these other insertions that we've created, which are these kind of like, almost like jewel box, but yet natural elements that screen things that happen on the inside. And what happens on the inside are these contemplative moments and places where one can rest. This is the view of the kitchen, which just gives you a sense of some of the transparent and translucent elements that we used in the space. And this is another view of the kitchen with this box insertion. But the moments that are important from within those boxes are where you get glimpses out. So as we think about these environments where we go to be kind of alone, for sleeping, for contemplation, for meditation, we think about the connections to the spaces adjacent. Now within this element, in this particular case, we wanted the light to pass through the walls. So the walls are actually made up of a offset wood slat system. We also found these marine portholes through I think it was a Dutch marine company, and created a system where the glass panels provide acoustical privacy, but yet these portals allow for ventilation and additional light to pass through. We carried that system into the bathrooms as well, and here you can see the quality of light that passes through. And then back in the bedroom wing, we took a different approach. So the previous images you saw were of a guest bedroom. In the master bedroom wing, we listened carefully to the client, and he actually does a lot of work with his financial firm and needed an office environment that was closely connected to where he and his wife sleep. So there is a whole kind of pull-out system here where he's got his TV screen, he's got a place to work that's embedded into this built-in wall. But on the other side, and there's a change of bedspread as well because we took the shots on 2 different days, the slat system comes back in and it allows for this screen-like connection into his bathroom, and the porthole pieces are there as well. So the notion here is that the bedroom actually has a lot of flexibility to it. So it has a work environment built into it. It has a sleeping component. It has direct connection to bathing as well. And the entire environment is almost like a little cocoon where the client can go and have many functions happening at the same time. This doesn't necessarily work for every client, but when we listen to this client, this seemed to work really well for his needs. And then this is the view from inside the bathroom. So oftentimes these environments that we create for our clients are, again, connected to other adjacent spaces. And it's important to think about how views can be borrowed across them, light can be borrowed across them, and the material interplay from one side of a room to the other actually can have a very powerful effect. This is another project. It's a new house construction up in Dutchess County. This client was quite interesting because he asked us to design the guest house while we were also designing a main house. We built the guest house first with the idea that he would live in it with his family, and then we'd work on the main house. They moved into the guest house and they actually loved it so much that the main house never got built. So word of advice is be careful about how good of a job you're going to do because you might actually lose your second commission. The second house that we were supposed to build was actually going to be a sort of adaptation of a Pennsylvania Dutch barn. So this client had purchased this very old Pennsylvania Dutch barn from a farmer. It was collapsed into a container and brought to the site. So several years later, that container is still sitting on the site with the Dutch barn pieces. So this is the property. It's an open 360-acre farm. It has a pond. And these are just some textures from the site that sort of inspired us as we were walking around. These are some inspirations that we had from talking to the client about themes in the project. So in terms of the various artists, we looked at Donald Judd, we looked at Agnes Martin, and just thought about kind of very simple, minimal proportions that had to be perfect. When you're designing a small building, and this one was 2,000 square feet, and you're trying to sleep 4 to 6 people there, you have to be very efficient with every square inch of space. We also looked at some references that the client talked to us about. So we looked at the Farnsworth House, we looked at the Seagram's building, and just thought about these sort of very pure, simple proportions from what one might consider now to be classical modernist architecture, but these are really, you know, some of the best examples from that period. So this is a model that we built. This is a more finished model. We had a whole series of study models that we looked at. And the concept for the house is that it's an all-glass structure, glass all the way around. There's a central core, which houses a lot of the mechanical spaces, the bathroom. It also has a sleeping chamber inside, which I'll show you in a minute. The kitchen and living room are on one end. The master bedroom or the main sleeping area is on the other end. And the entire structure actually plays a huge role in terms of how these spaces are experienced. So the house is lifted up on a plinth. There's a steel frame structure above with full cantilevered roof on the two ends. And that allows us to have this, essentially a curtain wall, wrap around the entire building. So in the floor plan, this is the central core area. There are actually 4 posts that are sort of deployed in very specific locations in this core that hold up the entire roof. So it was also an exercise in using the minimum amount of material to create this very expressive form. The middle chamber here has 2 sets of bunk beds. So his children could have a guest come and stay over with them. So the girls' bunk bed is here, the boys' bunk bed is there. The master bedroom suite is here with a series of panels that also close down to prevent light from coming in. And this is the main kitchen and living area. In this project, we also used a lot of strategies for sustainable design. So this just gives you a sense of all those strategies. They're all hidden in the house. So you really don't see any of this kind of expressed, which was part of the design approach. But as you're thinking about environments that you're creating, it's really important to think about not only the beautiful, tangible aesthetic aspects, but how is it going to perform? Does it have performative qualities that are going to enhance the experience? So we thought a lot about radiant floor heating. We thought about different methods of ventilation. We did geothermal heating and cooling. We also have a rainwater cistern collection system for irrigation outside. And this is the structure. So it's a steel frame system that allows for these full cantilevers. So even when we're thinking about the interior environment, we have to pull it way back and think about structurally, how are we going to make this happen? Physically, how do we actually design this in a way that's going to meet budget, meet the abilities of the local construction team in the area? So there are a lot of different components that one has to really kind of mash through as you're coming up with what might in the end look like an incredibly simple solution. And this is just a diagram that I just wanted to show you the level of detail that goes into thinking about this environment. So you've got the glass facade. We have a raised floor so that heating can actually come up the glass so you don't have condensation in the wintertime. We have a roller shade that comes down for shading and privacy. We have a sliding panel that also provides additional privacy. And then we have zones for supply and return air. So all of this goes into creating what ends up being a very simple looking environment. This is the house with the view from the pond. This is a closer up view of the house. So again, it's glass on all sides. This is a view through the corner of the house. So with these open glass corners, the idea was to be completely immersed in this outdoor experience. So now the landscape actually becomes the artwork for the home. This house was really meant to be just very expressive of this indoor and outdoor connection. And then this is the view from the living room looking straight out through the windows. As we head to the back, to places where you would actually sleep, you're following this core surface. And this is a view at nighttime. On the other side, the core surface actually transitions into a bookshelf area, and then you pass through to the bedroom. So this is the master bedroom. So we designed it in such a way that it has a series of built-in elements. So the client really doesn't have to bring a lot of additional furniture in. So this headboard has a place to pull out additional pillows and blankets. There's a built-in light up here. There's a shelf where they can put water or their glasses, additional bookshelf space. There are doors on either side of this piece that flip out, which allow you to close down the sides of the room. These panels actually slide closed. There's an operable window. And on the other side here, there's actually built-in TV and more bookshelves. And this is just showing how the panels slide back and forth to be able to enclose the room as needed. There are also a series of motorized shades on the two ends of the room. And this is a view from the bed looking back out to the landscape. Now, within this house, there's this core that has the bunk beds for the kids. So the idea here was that this porous screen surface would allow ventilation through. There's actually a window on the other side of the room. across the hallway. The bunk beds themselves were custom designed, so they're actually cantilevering off of the wall. There's a stainless steel rail and a stainless steel ladder that allows you to go up and down. But these pieces were meant to be really integrated with the walls of the room. And even fussy little details, like thinking about the client's kids reading at night and what they could do if one didn't want to sleep and the other one does want to sleep, you know, how to manage those things. So all these fussy little conditions we try to build into our projects. And the kids at the time were in elementary school and middle school. So there was this idea of, you know, how does one study when you're up here in this tiny, compact house? So we have a series of flip-out doors that then reveal a small little desk space, so they have a place to study. But yet they're still always connected to the view out. This is another project in Michigan. It's on Lake Michigan. The site is quite stunning. We had never been to Michigan before visiting our clients there. And I'll just tell you a little backstory on how we actually met this client, because as you go through your career, you will find opportunities to meet people that you might never expect. So this client actually saw the previous project, the LM Guest House, published in the Wall Street Journal. He saved the article, and then about a year later called, and I was actually on vacation, but he called the office gave him my cell phone. So I'm on vacation talking to this client, and he's saying, you know, I really love this house. We've been doing this search for architects, but I haven't found anyone in Michigan that I'm really that excited to work with. And I'm just wondering, any chance you might be willing to work on the project with me? And I said, of course, we'd love to work on this project with you. Why don't you send me the information? You know, how should we plan to meet? And he said, well, I'm going to be in New York in about a week, so why don't I call you and we'll set up a time to meet. So a week goes by and I didn't hear from him. So then I thought, okay, it's sort of like, you know, what a lot of us experience, you know, not every project's going to work out. But then a month later, he called up and he said, I'm really sorry, I wasn't able to make it to New York, but now I'm really eager to get started on the project. Would you still be interested? And I said, of course we're still interested. And he said, all right, I'm just going to send you a ticket. I want you to fly out to Traverse City, get a car, come up and meet me on site, and we'll just start the project. That has never happened to us before, and since that experience, we have never had that kind of like sort of amazing, immediate synergy with the client where they just, you know, kind of say, you're it. But every now and then you get these surprising moments. So initially, I got off the phone and I said to my partner, who's also my husband, okay, this guy's sending me a ticket. He wants me to fly up, go to some remote part of northern Michigan. So either we're getting a project or you're gonna find me in a body bag on the side of the road. And he was like, well, good luck to you. I hope you bring back the project. So went up to northern Michigan, and lo and behold, I'm standing next to my little rental car in the middle of a cherry field, which is this. The site is right where he's standing. And he shows up in a truck and we go into the site and we start talking about the project and we're off to the races. So this project had an interesting evolution in terms of the use of materials and some of the concepts. So northern Michigan has these old historic fishing villages. So this is one of them. And as I went around the peninsula with him and looked at the vernacular architecture in the area, I thought a lot about the materials, the way these buildings create a cluster of community. So the buildings actually sort of talk to each other in a quirky kind of way. As these buildings talk to each other, they create this sense of community. At the same time, we were also talking to the client about durable materials for construction, especially for the outside of the house. And he said, you know, I've been thinking about this material that I've read about. It's called shosugiban. It's a burnt charred wood. It just so happens we had just finished up a project in Singapore. We were on our way to Singapore. We had plans to stop off in Narita and hang out in Japan for about a week and a half to do a little bit of just kind of fun downtime. And I said, well, you know, why don't we go and look at some of these buildings in person? We'll come back with our research and let you know, is shosugiban really legitimate, or is this something that, you know, might not do so well in northern Michigan? So we went. To Kyoto and Tokyo, looked at a lot of these buildings which have been up for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years. They're all holding up really well. The materials are doing really well. And we said, you know, this is definitely a possibility. We looked at the climate of Japan, and where these buildings are located, it turns out it's not that much different in latitude compared to northern Michigan. So we came back with our research, and then we also said to the client, you know, what's really interesting is just culturally, these Japanese fishing villages are also a community of buildings that talk to each other. So there's something that's actually quite sympathetic, despite the fact that these communities are on opposite sides of the globe. So as we thought about the house, we started to think about the house as actually a community of structures. So I just want to introduce you to the site. So this is the edge of Lake Michigan. The house is on a bluff that's about 150 feet above the water level. This is the siting of the house. And as you come down that cherry farm, we have a new road that then extends to the client's site. So we thought about this notion of a cluster of structures that would create a community. The client talked a lot about community in his family. He has 3 daughters. They were in high school and college, and he talked about how the family would grow over time and the importance of community within his family, that the girls get along really well. They wanted to make sure the next generation also kind of comes together at this house, and they all sort of have this really great interaction. So we thought about the cluster as a series of structures that would inhabit, or that could be inhabited for living and dining, and then bedrooms, and then how those clusters get offset and shifted and then recombined. So this is the final study model, and we took all of those parts and pieces and tested them out, and this was one of the models that we came up with. So in terms of plan, there's a central breezeway zone, which acts as a ventilator for the building, as well as becoming the front door and dining area. The master bedroom is located off the dining area. There's another wing for the daughters, and each of them gets a queen-size bed in their bedroom. The lower level has a large bunk room for future grandkids. And then there's a living dining room kitchen zone as well, with a big cantilever over a large outdoor deck. So this is the view from the end of the house looking back towards the outdoor deck. It has a double-sided fireplace. So this is a communal space for gathering. And then as you come into the front entry moment here, there's a series of steps that takes you up to this front entry moment. You look through straight through the hallway area. This is the bedroom wing for the daughters. So this is the bedroom wings, the master bedroom wing here, and the daughter's bedroom wing here. The use of the shosugi-ban, we kind of customized the proportions because we really wanted to express the depth of shadow. This area, when the sun comes around, the quality of the shadows are actually quite beautiful and dramatic, and we wanted the house to express the quality of light, but also the movement of time. So through shadow, you can actually express movement of time across a day. And connection to indoor and out was actually quite important, and the use of different materials. So we actually expressed the structural beams in the ceiling, and the beams create an undulation that's actually performative as well. So the roof is actually meant to capture water and snow. One thing about Lake Michigan is with these bluffs, there's a tremendous amount of erosion. The big problem with erosion is eventually those cliffs actually fall down and go straight to the beachfront of the lake. So as a kind of proactive measure, we looked at how to drain water away from that edge. So the house actually collects the water so that it can then drag the water down to the ground and pipe it away to daylight far away from the edge of the cliff. So the undulations that you see here are actually meant to do that work, but it's very expressive on the inside of the house as well. So it creates form on the inside of the house that actually contributes to the environment that you're living in. So this is one of those dips in the roof that's expressive on the inside as a spatial experience. It enhances the quality of the light and the materials, but on the outside, it's actually driving the water away from the edge of the lake here. We carried the shosugi-ban into the house as well, and that was one of the important themes, was this indoor and outdoor connection between materials as well as views. This is the view of the dining area. And off of the dining area, we have the bedroom. So this was a situation where the client talked a lot about how he actually moves in and out of the bedroom quite a bit. So he uses it for sleeping, but it's also just this place where he might go and lie down for 15 minutes, but then he wants to come out and be part of the action. So the location of where you put sleeping areas is actually quite important. And I think listening to clients and thinking about their lifestyle and the ritual about how they go through the day will help inform you in terms of how that plays out. It's not going to be the same for everyone. And I think it's actually really healthy to sort of come to each project with an open mind and a clean slate, because then you'll be able to experiment quite a bit more. And it's also good to kind of bring your clients along in that journey, because they're going to be used to seeing a lot of very conventional ways of doing things. But try and get them to loosen up a little bit and get them to acknowledge that their lifestyle is actually what you're designing for. It's not for a magazine or a set of images that they might have pulled out of some, Pinterest board. So one thing that we did was the Shosugi-ban is part of this interior vocabulary. When we went into the room, we sort of did a riff on that with this very large stained wood panel of wall, which also includes the door. The furniture in this room, there's an interesting story behind this. The site was heavily wooded with ash trees. But in northern Michigan, ash trees have basically been blighted and destroyed by an ash borer beetle, which hopped off a plane from Asia years ago and has since kind of eaten up a lot of the ash trees and decimated them. So what's happened in northern Michigan is you have a lot of these trees that are essentially on the verge of dying. There's no antidote to this ash borer beetle. So we got to the site, we saw this, and we said to the client, we need to do something with these trees. We can't just let them die, and if you're going to take them down, they shouldn't just go into a wood chipper. So we took probably over 200 trees, had them planed down at a mill, and they became the wood floor, they became the ceiling of the dining area, and they became various pieces of furniture in the house. So all of this material is actually referencing the heritage of the area. And for the client, that was actually really important. He's a Michigan born and raised person. He's been coming to this area for summers for I don't know how long. And I think we wanted him to feel like a sense of the history of the place was embedded in the house. He talked about the house as a place that he would turn over to his children as well. So we wanted his kids and his grandkids and other generations to know that this was part of the Michigan heritage. So we had some very large pieces of ash wood, and we were able to make these furniture pieces, design bedside tables, design a small desk area. And then this is the end of my lecture. Thank you very much. So I think in general, a challenge in every project to different degrees is helping the client to see past their baggage. And I use the term baggage very loosely. It's not a negative thing. It's really that they bring a lot to the table, and we really listen carefully to what they offer as experiences that they appreciate, environments that they appreciate. But we also want them to come to a project afresh. So trying to get them to just put some of that aside, look at things anew, and be able to understand that maybe there is a different kind of environment that would actually be better for them is one of the challenges. And some clients are immediately kind of connected to that thinking, and others it takes a little bit more time, and we have to kind of keep encouraging them to be open-minded. I think for a tangible kind of example of something that was really challenging, let's see. I mean, right now we have one client who I think has some very specific ideas of, what they think a sleeping environment is, and we're just trying to get them to realize that there are more connections across the spaces that can maybe help this environment be stronger as a design. So for example, it's not just an independent room, but it's actually a room that's connected to bathing, that's connected to an outdoor situation. Budget always plays a role in these projects. It doesn't matter if it's a commercial project, residential project, institutional project. So getting them to appreciate that there's actually inherent value in some of these choices that might be a little bit more expansive in terms of budget and in terms of square footage. But at the end of the day, you know, for the long term, it's going to be a better decision for them.
So other than like natural materials drawn from like the landscape, have you ever done a project where it's like bold and bright and like draw inspiration from like modernist art or like cubism, where you're using like primary color or something like that? I mean, obviously wood, concrete, steel, natural elements, things like that. But I was just wondering if you've ever had that experience as well.
We have. I didn't put those projects up. Those projects tend to be more in the area of some of our work for commercial offices, institutional projects. Although we have done some environments, residential, where we've used a big, bold block of color or like a really expressive pattern of texture across a surface. It really is sort of so site-specific and so client-specific as well. One of the interesting aspects of working with clients who have amazing art collections, actually, is that oftentimes you have to be very careful about not competing with their artwork. So, for example, we had one client, I mean, his collection of art was museum quality, and he had a series of paintings, and we just knew that if we put any sort of like, you know, heavier-handed approach, it might actually compete with the artwork. So there's a balancing act there. I think lighting's actually incredibly important. I didn't talk that much about lighting in these projects, but in all of our projects we work with the same lighting designer who we've worked with for 25 years. Lighting can play a really dramatic role in architecture, and there are moments where sometimes it's just the quality of the lighting across a surface or across a material that can be quite dramatic. But we try to think about architecture and interiors in terms of kind of more than just like a one-liner gimmick. And that's not to say that color or a cubist moment would be a one-liner gimmick, but we really think about kind of how does it have an enduring experience? You know, how can you come back to it each time and feel like it's refreshing or it's inviting again? What we don't want in our work is to have a project where it becomes a bit of a meme or just a kind of, not a gimmick, but you know, it becomes a little dated after a while. I guess that's, you know, one of the things we try to avoid. So we try to be very judicious about the use of maybe sort of these bolder statements that you're talking about. Well, I'm curious if any of you have specific questions about the environment of sleeping. I mean, obviously you've had experiences sleeping yourself, and you've tried to get enough sleep even though you're undergrads and working very hard in the studio. But as you've been going through the semester, what is it about this aspect of sleeping that might be new to you from what you had, you know, thought of before you came to SVA? Have you learned anything new or different? Is there a particular kind of approach or theme that's kind of opened your eyes?
No, it's on. Yeah, just.
Well, before I came to New York, I'm from the West Coast, so at night is usually really quiet. And before I came to New York, I never realized how like acoustics affects a big part of your day. And I think it's just throughout the day we hear so much noises. It's not about it being loud. It's the layers of sounds in the city that gets to you. At night, you don't even realize the street noises, but I think for certain people, it affects them even though you're still sleeping, but you're hearing these noises constantly, and you wake up and you don't feel like you got enough. You got to sleep, but you didn't get. Your mind is not clear, and that's something I never considered as like a major part of a bedroom, like sound. I thought like being quiet is not a big deal if you're sleeping, but it is. So yeah, that's what I noticed.
I think you bring up a really good point, and it's often hard to capture that in a series of visual images. I mean, my own experience living in New York, we've been living in the same apartment since 1996. When we moved in, we put in sort of just very basic windows. And about 7 years ago, we splurged and went for these really nice tilt and turn windows that really lock out the sound, and we put in an interlayer that even sort of dampens sound even more. And I realized for the prior years I had not been sleeping well, because once you put in that level of sound barrier and you really realize you can kind of have a restful night's sleep, it's makes such a difference. I mean, I think when you're thinking about these environments, sound is incredibly important. It's the sound that comes from the street, but it's also the sound that comes from other rooms. And so where you place sleeping areas relative to other activity areas is very important. So that's why I tried to show you 3 different projects, each with 3 different clients, 3 different intentions, 3 different patterns or rituals of behavior. Because the last project, the client actually wanted his master bedroom as close to the activity area as possible. But we used the dining area as a bit of a buffer between him and the main living area. Whereas in the LM guest house, the master bedroom was tucked all the way at the furthest, most remote point from the living spaces. So, so yeah, that quality of sound and connection to other activities in the home or in the hotel or wherever you might be is really important. And as you think about your choice of products, you're going to find out which windows are going to work well and which ones are not going to work so well in terms of sound. There's also the quality of light. So when you pick a window, the quality of the UVB layer that you use to prevent infrared from coming in and damaging your furniture or turning the floors a different color also makes a difference. The kinds of shades you pick. We tend to use roller shades a lot, but clients who need full blackout conditions for sleeping, it's a combination of roller shades and heavy drapes. So all of those subtle details are actually really important, because at the end of the day, you really only get one shot to make this right. Once you build something, it's incredibly permanent. So despite the ease of drawing things up in Rhino and SketchUp and all these programs where you can sort of in a flip of a couple of key commands change the environment, construction is permanent. It really is. Even clients who say to me, please design something that's totally flexible. I want to move all this stuff around. I want to rearrange my furniture every other day. They move in, they never rearrange things. They basically live with it as is. So you have to sort of think about what's the best group of parameters you can create for an environment for your client. And I think your point about sound is really important. It's important to listen to spaces. When you go into different places, to just understand how those environments were designed, you definitely should listen, because there's an echoing effect as well with materials. Some materials are more absorptive, some are more reflective. So all of that goes into this experience you're talking about.
So basically, talk about the like you were inspired by not only the traditional art but also the contemporary art. How do they really related to the idea of biophilia and the space you created?
Oh, sorry, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So how does the the contemporary art actually related to the idea of biophilia and work with screens and the spaces you created?
So the contemporary art is really a point of departure. So I'm not trying to use contemporary art as a literal kind of imposition into the environment. It's really thinking about what are the qualities of the contemporary art that really are going to inspire kind of the organization and the composition of an environment. And sometimes it's about texture and light. So for example, one of our favorite artists is Donald Judd. We also like James Turrell. So between Donald Judd and James Turrell, what you get is this kind of crafted, beautiful proportion of space with the use of very minimal materials. And with James Turrell, it's all about the atmosphere of light, not necessarily the fixtures themselves. So I would say that we don't necessarily copy exactly, in a literal way, the contemporary art references into our work, but they draw out themes that we then try to think about in terms of an architectural environment. So, unlike, some architects who think about architecture as sculpture and you inhabit the sculpture, and that's one way of thinking about architecture and environment, we think about it as a human experience. It's really about a human experience of people coming together, people having a very personal, connected experience to materials and light. So these inspirational references are really meant to kind of continue that conversation and not necessarily be like, a literal one-on-one or one-to-one transfer.
Well, your work is stunning. It's great to see. You have some very bold structural moves. You use cantilevers a lot. Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. So the structural moves are really meant to allow for sort of a dynamic quality of space. And in the Michigan Lake House, we had that large 20-foot overhang. What it allowed was implying an outdoor room without walls. So basically the outdoor living room with the fireplace is a large 20-foot by 20-foot seating area, which gets furnished with dining tables, outdoor living furniture. And the cantilevered roof implies the kind of anchoring of that room, but yet you can see out to nature on all sides. So these are really ways of integrating structure with architecture and in a way with interiors, that everything kind of talks to each other and has a reason for being. So no move is gratuitous. It's really trying to say what is one thing doing to support something else in terms of an experience. I think it's important, with interior design to think about structural moves, because essentially what you're doing is you're creating the bones of the environment for the clients. So it's not just about kind of surfacing and interior finishes. You have the ability to be kind of an advocate for big, bold structural moves, especially if they're going to improve the quality of space and the quality of place.
This is actually brought up by my studio teacher. He mentioned that whether we younger designer are manipulated by internet, similar to what you mentioned about Pinterest, but the problem is whether how do we jump out of the box? Like, we don't think as guy who found that you can find their design in Pinterest. How do you make it more like your own design? Although I sense the answer from what you mentioned about custom and human experience, but could you go deeper in that?
So your question is really, how do you not get caught up in just all of the online visuals and kind of chasing after
Yes.
that kind of, yeah. The biggest, it's interesting. Carol, you probably can relate to this. So when I was in grad school, there was no Pinterest, there was no internet. We didn't even work on a computer, which was kind of surprising because we were at MIT. So there was computers, but it was like in a totally different part of the university. And then since coming out and getting trained as an architect, now having my own firm, and being very much engaged with all things digital, I see the pros and I see the cons of what the internet has to offer. So the biggest challenge is that back in the day before the internet, these images and projects were curated by magazine editors and architecture critics and people who basically distilled what they felt was the best of the best. And so when you'd see it in an exhibition or in a magazine, you'd say, oh, there's a reason for why these things are being presented to me, and you kind of study them. And then you'd look at books. So nowadays with the internet, you can Google, modern house, and stuff will come up. It's not curated. A lot of it's not that great or may not even relate to your project. And so you have to be very discerning about what you look at online. And you have to basically kind of develop within yourself a language and a commitment to what you believe in as a designer. I think that each designer brings to the table a different set of values that they care about. Some overlap, because I think like I'm very sympathetic to the work that Carol does. I love her work, and probably vice versa. We really understand each other. There's some designers out there that I can admire their work, but it's not my thing. It's not where I'm going. So you have to find your voice, and you have to think about what you care about. You have to think about whether you care about your clients. I mean, you have to care about what your clients care about and bring that into the mix. And through that, I think about editing. I'm always telling people in my office that it's not about trying to throw everything into a project or just sort of mishmash a bunch of things into a collage. You have to think about how to edit. And that's a really hard, it's an incredibly hard task. You have to be very rigorous. So I would say have a critical eye. Think very carefully about what you're doing. When you create something in Rhino, it shouldn't just be about like sort of collaging and pastiching things together. Be very judicious, make some judgment calls, and set up a hierarchy for yourself about what's important in the design. Some of it's going to be aesthetic. A lot of it should be programmatic. I mean, ultimately, architecture and interior design has to work programmatically. So always rub up any aesthetic decisions against the functional. And think about the long-term use of your projects. I always judge my projects by whether they still look good 10 years later. If they don't look good 10 years later, then I've done my clients a disservice. And I've actually done myself a disservice because I didn't do enough research to really understand what I was putting into those projects. So you've got a long career ahead of you. I think it's important to just use some core value judgments that you're going to always kind of use as a guidepost as you make decisions about what you want to introduce into your projects.
What do you think is more difficult? Because from the presentation today, one was an existing interior space, and then one was like new construction. So what, as a designer, do you feel, obviously the existing conditions dictates or restricts some design moves, whereas if a new construction, you have this like infinity of creativity that could like go on. What do you think is more difficult to like deal with or manage or design?
So I think that's actually the myth. People think that when you have a clean slate and like a piece of open farmland, for example, that you can do anything you want. And that's actually a myth, because at the end of the day, you're still designing for context. You still have building codes you have to deal with. You still have your client's budget. You still have constraints like what's in the ground and the contours of the site. In an existing building, you have other kinds of constraints. You've got the four walls, you've got where the mechanical systems and the plumbing risers are. So I guess we try to come to every project with excitement, regardless of whether it's new construction or an existing building, because each project ends up revealing interesting constraints that you would not have predicted. So for example, when you're designing on a pure piece of property and you're building a new house, you're going to find that you actually have a height restriction. The community is going to say, or the building code will say, 35-foot height limit, and that's what you've got. You're going to find that there are setbacks on the property, and you can't go past those setbacks. You might find that there is a local architectural review committee that's actually going to review your project, and if the materials are too far-fetched for them, they'll shoot it down and you won't get your permit. So I would say that each project requires a lot of research, and that's actually something that I think is really important for you to think about as you're doing your projects here in studio. All the research that you're doing and that whole process of doing research is actually incredibly relevant to what you'll be doing later on. Each project that I do starts off with a body of research that we pull together. There are aesthetic components to it, there's the client input and the client's lifestyle component to it, but there's the whole kind of like existing context component. When you go into an existing building, some of the biggest challenges might be unexpected too. Like, you might find that you're designing, for example, an apartment, and the neighbors next door play loud music, and then you've got to deal with the sound thing through the wall. Or you might find that the co-op or the condo has actually quite severe restrictions on how long the construction project can take. There are plenty of buildings in New York where you get the summer, so that's 3 months. Now, if you're doing a 5,000 square foot renovation in 3 months, you know, that's kind of an impossible schedule. So how do you stage it over time? So I would say think about these opportunities in all these situations. And as you do the research, you'll sort of find how these opportunities actually lead to really interesting solutions. So I always tell people, don't get discouraged if you feel like, oh, this is a junky site, or oh, I've got to do something in this post-war building that's so boring, there are only 8-foot high ceilings. There's opportunity there, and you just have to peel back the layers to find them.
That was so inspirational, and we can